Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're taking on a topic that I know a lot of you have been curious about, digital minimalism. You sent us a bunch of really interesting stuff, some research papers, excerpts, even a full-blown book on this. And we're gonna, well, dive deep and see what we can uncover.
Yeah, it's really cool because even though this term digital minimalism is, pretty new-ish, a lot of the core ideas have been around for like way longer than you'd think.
Okay, so give us a taste of that. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Well, we've got media theory in here, social psychology, even stuff that connects to historical practices. It's kind of wild.
All right, I am officially intrigued. Where should we even begin with all this?
Hmm. Well, this idea of the attention economy seems like a good place to start, right? It's not just that tech exists, it's that whole industries are built around grabbing our attention and then selling it.
Yeah, okay, I'm seeing that in the stuff you sent over.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying it's not just that I waste time on cat videos, although guilty as charged. It's that the whole system is set up to make me do it.
Exactly. One of the research papers actually uses this analogy. It compares refreshing a social media feed to a gambler pulling a slot machine lever.
Whoa, that's kind of a dark comparison, don't you
Yes,
think?
but it makes you think, right? It's about that same anticipation, that little dopamine hit that keeps you coming back for more, even if, like, deep down, you know you should be doing something else.
Okay, that makes sense. And don't even get me started on those red notification badges. Just seeing those little numbers makes my anxiety spike. It's like they weaponize our fear of missing out, right? Like, engage now or you'll regret it.
It's like FOMO fuel. And honestly, what might be even sneakier, even more powerful than that, is this thing they call the binary trap.
Okay, binary trap. Break that down for me.
Basically, they're saying that these platforms make it feel like it's all or nothing, like you're either totally on board, using it all the time, or you're completely out.
Ah, I see what you mean. Like, there's no room for just, I don't know, using it intentionally. Like, only when it actually serves a purpose.
Right, like having a healthy, balanced relationship with it. So the question is, how do we break out of this trap? How do we actually use tech and not just let it use us?
Well, that's where this whole digital minimalism thing comes in, right? From what I'm seeing in these sources, it's like this counter movement, a way to reclaim our time and attention in this, like, hyper-connected world.
Totally. And the principles behind it, they're surprisingly simple. Like the first one is clutter is costly, meaning too much tech creates negative costs that are bigger than whatever little benefits you might get from each app or device.
Okay, so it's not just me feeling overwhelmed. It's like there's an actual cost to having all this stuff around, even if I think I'm using it for good reasons.
Exactly. It's like seeing the forest for the trees. And the second principle, optimization is important. So even if you do decide, okay, this piece of tech serves a purpose in my life, you've got to be strategic about how you use it to really get the most out of it.
So what are we talking here? Like setting boundaries with it, turning off notifications, being mindful of when and how we actually engage with it.
You got it. Now, here's the thing, and this is a biggie. Intentionality is satisfying. The sources keep saying that people who are into digital minimalism find real joy in being really deliberate about their tech use, like regardless of what choices they actually make.
So it's less about being a tech hater, more about consciously choosing how tech fits in and then actually feeling good about those choices.
You nailed it. Now, one of the most effective strategies we keep seeing is this idea of a digital declutter, like hitting the reset button on your tech.
Okay, so this is sounding interesting. What does a digital declutter actually look like?
Well, the book we got suggests trying this 30-day experiment. You start by figuring out all the tech you could totally live without for a month. Then, and this is the hard part, you take a break from all of it.
A whole 30 days. Wow, that's commitment.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, but it's
Yeah.
about stepping back from all the digital noise and rediscovering what you actually enjoy doing in the real world. It's about filling that tech void with something, well, something more meaningful.
So it's not just cutting out tech, but replacing it with something else, something more intentional.
Bingo. Then, after those 30 days, you slowly start adding back only the technologies that actually align with your values and bring something positive to your life. It's a quality over quantity thing.
This is making a lot of sense. Okay, so we declutter, rediscover, then we reintroduce. But what about everyday distractions, even after you've streamlined your tech? How does digital minimalism help with that?
Great question. Well, the book talks about minimizing those low-value distractions, like being super honest with yourself and figuring out which online activities are just eating up your time without giving you much in return.
So we're talking like endless social media scrolling, those internet rabbit holes that suck you in, constantly checking email even when you know nothing important is waiting.
You know it. The sources say that recognizing those habits is the first step. Then you can start swapping them out with activities that are actually fulfilling.
So, less about willpower, more about planning.
Well, it's kind of both. You got to make the choice to disengage, but having a plan B makes it way easier. What else can we dive into here?
Hmm. Well, we talked about decluttering and minimizing distractions. What other ways do the sources say we can get back in control?
Ooh, they spend some time talking about optimizing the essential technologies, the ones you can't or don't want to totally get rid of.
So it's like making the tech you do use work for you, not against you.
Exactly. They say to try actually removing social media apps from your phone so you're not tempted to just scroll anytime you have a free minute. Another idea is to set specific times to check your email so you don't interrupt your workflow all the time.
So basically setting up rules and structure so tech isn't calling all the shots all the time.
Exactly. And speaking of rules, the sources actually bring up a pretty radical strategy. They call it dumbing down your smartphone. Like seriously thinking about switching to a basic phone, maybe even a flip phone, to take back control.
Wait, hold up. Are they talking about ditching smartphones entirely? Going totally old school?
Well, not quite the Stone Age, but they definitely present it as a real option. Their thinking is smartphones can be useful, yes, but for some people, the constant connectivity is doing more harm than good.
I can definitely see that. I mean, imagine no constant notifications, no feeling like you have to be available 24/7.
Exactly. It's about breaking free and being present in the real world without that digital leash. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. So what happens if we do declutter, cut out distractions, maybe even ditch the smartphone? The sources talk about this high-quality leisure idea, right?
Oh, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. They talk about this thing called the Bennett principle. It basically says that if you put more energy into how you spend your leisure time, you'll actually feel more energized.
Wait, so instead of just vegging out after work, they're saying to actively challenge yourself in your free time.
Exactly. Like, they give examples from folks in the financial independence community, like Mr. Money Mustache, Pete Aidme. He gets super into hands-on projects like building and fixing stuff. Or Liz Thames, who loves gardening and chopping wood, physically demanding but really rewarding, you know?
Okay, so they're saying to find activities that are enjoyable, sure, but also challenging, mentally and physically engaging.
Precisely. And it doesn't have to be solo stuff either. The sources really highlight social leisure, too.
Ah, so it's not about becoming a hermit, but finding meaningful ways to connect with other people.
Exactly. They even have this term, supercharged socializing, which sounds intense. But it's basically about doing structured activities with others, like board game nights, group fitness classes, volunteering, even regular potlucks.
Got it. Like having shared goals, rules, rituals, it creates a space for deeper interaction than like just hanging out online.
Right, and they say that kind of structured interaction can feel even more freeing, like joining groups can actually help fight loneliness and build a real sense of belonging.
So it's not about cutting yourself off, but about finding a better balance between tech and real-world stuff.
100%. Now, speaking of balance, that brings us to another big concept, solitude deprivation.
Okay, solitude deprivation. Break that down for me. What is it, and why should I care?
It's basically when you spend almost no time alone with your own thoughts without any external input. And they say it's messing with our well-being, like causing problems with concentration, making us more anxious, even making it harder to regulate our emotions.
That sounds uncomfortably familiar. I feel like I'm always plugged in, always connected to something or someone.
Yeah, it's super common these days. But the good news is they offer ways to reclaim solitude. Like one thing they suggest is just leaving your smartphone at home sometimes.
Oh man, just thinking about that makes me feel phantom vibrations. But I get it. It's about challenging that assumption that we have to be connected all the time.
Exactly. Or they suggest going for long walks without your phone, just letting your mind wander.
You know, there really is something about being out in nature that makes it easier to unplug. It's like a natural reset button.
Right. Oh, and here's one I thought was really interesting. They recommend writing letters to yourself.
Wait, like actual handwritten letters? That's kind of old school, isn't it?
Yeah, but they say it helps you look inward and get to know yourself better. It's a much slower, more thoughtful way to process your thoughts and feelings.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Like you're slowing down that internal chatter and actually taking the time to listen to what your mind has to say.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be some big, long letter. Even just jotting down some thoughts for a few minutes can make a big difference.
Okay, I'm willing to give it a shot.
Huh.
Any other tips for making space for solitude? It's hard when the world's designed to keep us constantly stimulated.
Well, they also talk about setting up conversation office hours, like actually scheduling times to call friends and family rather than just relying on those quick back and forth texts all day.
So making our communication more intentional, more focused, instead of just firing off random texts whenever.
Exactly. And they argue that shifting to that kind of communication leads to better, more meaningful conversations, which strengthens our relationships.
Okay, I am on board with that. So we've covered this whole attention economy thing, the basics of digital minimalism, and why solitude is so important. What else is in these sources?
Ooh, one of the coolest things they talk about is this idea of slow media.
Okay, slow media sounds dot chill. What's that all about?
It's this whole movement that's pushing back against that constant flood of information. They want us to engage with media more deliberately, more mindfully, like choosing quality over quantity and really immersing yourself in a few things rather than just skimming a million different things.
It's like the antidote to the 24/7 news cycle in that never-ending social media scroll, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they really focus on applying this to how we get our news, picking just a few good sources, setting aside time to read without distractions, really digging into the material instead of just reading headlines.
So being more active, more critical, instead of just passively absorbing whatever pops up in your feed.
Exactly. They say it leads to better understanding, less anxiety, and just a better feeling overall about like how you're consuming information.
It makes sense. If you're not being constantly bombarded with negativity and clickbait, you're bound to feel calmer and more grounded.
Right. Okay, get this. They ever use the Amish as an example for digital minimalism.
The Amish, whoa, that's not where I thought this was going. How do they fit in?
It's fascinating, right? They're often seen as rejecting all tech, but the sources say they're actually super thoughtful about it. They don't just adopt tech because it's new or convenient. They make very deliberate choices based on how it will affect their community and their values.
So it's about being selective and putting your values before convenience.
Yes. And the sources say we can learn a lot from them.
Okay, I am intrigued. What kind of lessons are we talking about?
Well, first, they show that being intentional beats convenience. They're not afraid to pass on technologies that might make things easier if it goes against their values.
So being willing to choose the hard way sometimes if it means staying true to what matters.
Exactly. Second, they're all about understanding why you're using tech. They don't just blindly adopt things, they really think about the purpose and the impact.
So it's about asking yourself, why am I using this? Is it truly helping, or am I just following the crowd?
Exactly. And finally, they're masters of optimization. They often figure out how to adapt tech to fit their needs instead of letting tech dictate their lives.
So they're not against tech, they just use it on their own terms, understanding its limitations.
Exactly. Now, along those same lines, they talk about the difference between conversation and connection. It's super relevant these days.
Okay, conversation versus connection. I'm listening. What's the difference, and why does it matter?
They argue that face-to-face conversations are way more valuable than just digital communication, especially for building strong relationships. They say connection is more like low bandwidth interaction, like through texts and social media. It feels close, but it lacks the depth of real conversation.
So it's about being aware of how limited digital communication is and choosing face-to-face interaction whenever you can.
Exactly. They say conversations help us develop empathy and social intelligence in a way that just can't be replicated online.
I totally see that. There's so much nuanced depth that's lost in text messages and online interactions.
Right. So we got to be intentional about having real conversations. We might have to push back against the ease of just shooting a quick text.
So making that effort, prioritizing that FaceTime.
Yes. And realizing that while online stuff is great for keeping in touch, it can't replace real human interaction. We've covered so much, the attention economy, the core ideas of digital minimalism, how important solitude is. It really shows how complex our relationship with tech is and how it's always changing.
And it's clear that digital minimalism is more than just cutting down screen time. It's a whole different way of thinking, being mindful and intentional with tech.
Absolutely. And all these sources give us so much practical advice and inspiring examples to help us navigate this crazy digital world and build a tech life that actually works for us.
It's about taking back control of our time and attention, making conscious choices about how we use tech, and ultimately making our lives more fulfilling and meaningful.
Exactly. And we'll keep digging into these ideas in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. As we keep going with this digital minimalism deep dive, it's really striking how these sources want us to rethink what progress even means. We always think progress is like new tech, fancy gadgets, all that. But the Amish approach is like, whoa, sometimes saying no to tech is actually progress too.
That's so true. It's not about being anti-technology. It's more about realizing that technology isn't automatically good or bad. It's all about how we use it, you know?
Exactly. The Amish aren't just stuck in the past. They're making these really conscious choices about what they let into their lives, into their whole community, based on a deep understanding of what could happen. They value things like face-to-face communication, strong community, a slower pace of life, and they're willing to give up certain technologies to protect those things.
It's a powerful reminder that we have the power to decide how tech shapes our lives. It's about being intentional, like asking, what are we getting from this tech? What are we losing?
Exactly. And sometimes what we lose are those things that make life really meaningful, like real connection, time to think, space to be creative, even just being present in the moment. This whole conversation about the Amish and how they approach tech makes me think of another cool idea from the sources, the idea of craft as a form of high-quality leisure.
Oh, yeah, I remember this. They talked about how doing things that take skill and effort, like woodworking, knitting, playing music, even gardening, can be so much more fulfilling than just passively watching TV or scrolling online.
It's like tapping into that human need to create, to build, to use our hands and minds to make something real. It's about the whole process, not just the end result.
And it goes back to that Bennett principle that putting more energy into our free time can actually give us more energy, not less. There's something about pushing ourselves and learning new things that feels really good.
Totally. And I think it's also about what those activities leave behind. When you make something with your own hands or learn a new skill, you've created something that has meaning beyond that moment. You can be proud of it, share it, becomes part of your story.
It's a great counter to how fleeting everything is online. Everything's so temporary, you consume it and it's gone.
Exactly. Online is all about instant gratification, consuming, being entertained. But that doesn't always make us feel good.
Right. It's like we're always chasing that next dopamine hit, the next notification, but it never really satisfies that deeper need for meaning.
And that's where these high-quality leisure activities come in. They give a different kind of reward, a deeper satisfaction from actually engaging with the world in a more active way.
It's about taking charge, being the creator instead of just the consumer.
Now, while we're talking about consuming stuff, let's go back to slow media for a minute. I think it's such a great way to deal with all the information overload we face online.
Yeah, the sources were big on slowing down, being more thoughtful about what we take in and how we take it in. It's about quality over quantity, depth over just skimming the surface, being mindful instead of mindless.
Exactly. And I think it's especially important for how we consume news. Instead of just reading headlines and scrolling through feeds, they say pick a few good sources. Set aside time to really read and engage with what you're reading.
So it's about choosing what information we let in, taking time to actually understand it instead of being bombarded from all sides.
Exactly. And they say this whole slow media approach doesn't just help us understand the world better, it actually makes us less anxious and just feel better overall.
I can see that. If you're not constantly hit with breaking news and crazy headlines, you have more mental space to think for yourself.
Right. And it makes room for other things in your life. You're more present when you're not checking your phone for updates, able to have better conversations, more aware of what's around you.
It's about taking back your time and attention and using them on things that actually matter to you.
Now, while we're talking about the not so great parts of the digital world, let's talk about social media's impact on how we feel. The sources are pretty upfront about the dangers of solitude deprivation.
Yeah, that feeling of always being connected but rarely being alone with your own thoughts. And the research says that lack of solitude can really mess with our mental and emotional health.
Absolutely. We need solitude to process things, to make sense of the world, to connect with ourselves. Without it, we can lose touch with what we need and want, and we become more easily influenced by everything around us.
And what the sources point out is that social media often makes this worse. It creates a fake sense of connection that hides those deeper feelings of loneliness.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in likes and followers, but that doesn't mean you have real connections. We can spend hours scrolling, comparing ourselves to others, feeling bad because we don't measure up.
And all that time on social media is time we're not spending doing things that actually make us feel good, like connecting with people face to face, doing things we love, being in nature, or just being present.
Right. It's a trade-off. The sources want us to be more intentional about our social media use, to ask if it's actually making our lives better or just wasting our time and making us feel worse.
So it's about asking yourself, why am I even on here? What am I getting out of this? Is this how I really want to spend my time?
Exactly. And if the answer is no, maybe it's time to step back, set some limits, maybe even take a break from it altogether.
It's about realizing you have the power to choose how you spend your time and energy and building a digital life that makes you feel good instead of dragging you down.
And one of the best ways to break free from social media's hold, the sources say just delete the apps from your phone.
I know we talked about this earlier, but it still makes me nervous. It feels so extreme.
I get it. It's a big step. It's not for everyone. But a lot of people find it really freeing to create that barrier, you know? It makes it harder to mindlessly scroll when you have to go through extra steps to even get to the app.
So you're in control, deciding when and how you engage instead of just reacting to the app's notifications.
Exactly. And even if you're not ready to delete the apps, the sources have other ideas like turn off notifications so you're not constantly being pinged, or set time limits for how long you're on them.
Those are great places to start. It's about finding what works for you and gradually taking back control.
And remember, it's a journey. You don't become a digital minimalist overnight. It's about constantly checking in with yourself, how you feel about your tech use, and making changes as you go.
It's about being mindful, being intentional, and asking, is this technology helping me or am I just serving it?
Now, the sources get even bolder with some of their suggestions. They talk about making your devices single purpose. Your laptop's only for work, your tablet's only for reading, your phone's just for calls and texts.
I actually like that. It's like creating these separate spaces in your mind for different things. No more multitasking chaos.
Right. And they even talk about the dumb phone movement ditching the smartphone completely for something way simpler.
Well, we've mentioned that a few times, but tell me more about the benefits. Why would someone choose to do that?
Well, they say it helps you focus better, feel less anxious, and be more present in the real world. It's about disconnecting from that constant online world and remembering how to just be in the moment without your phone.
That sounds amazing, but could I actually survive without a smartphone? It feels like I use it for everything.
It's definitely a big decision, not for everyone,
Yeah.
but they make a pretty good case for how freeing it can be.
Okay, that's definitely something to think about. So for those of us not ready to go full dumb phone, what are some ways to manage distractions without going that far?
Mhm.
The sources talk about some tools and techniques, right?
Right. They recommend things like Freedom, which lets you block websites and apps for certain times, basically turning your computer into a single-purpose machine. Great when you need to really focus.
So it's like building those digital boundaries, but with some tech help to keep you on track.
Exactly. And they've got tons of other tips: organizing your digital space, cleaning up your inbox, using filters, scheduling specific times to check messages and stuff.
So you feel like you're in control of your tech, working with it to reach your goals instead of constantly fighting against it.
Exactly. And that brings us back to one of the big ideas: being intentional. Being mindful about how you use tech, setting those boundaries, making choices that line up with what you value.
It's about realizing that your time and attention are valuable. You get to choose how you spend them.
Now, something else that keeps coming up is the importance of reclaiming our free time and filling it with things that are actually good for us.
Right. It's not about just zoning out in front of a screen. Real leisure is about doing things that challenge us, make us happy, and help us grow.
And it doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. It could be as simple as taking a walk, reading a book, learning to cook, picking up a new language, volunteering, or just being with people you care about without phones and stuff.
It's about finding those things that make you feel alive and connected to the world.
Right. And the key is to be intentional about it. Schedule it in like it's an important meeting. Make leisure a priority, not just something you do if you have time left over.
It's about building a life that feels balanced, a life that reflects what you care about.
You got it. It's about creating a life that feels like yours, that makes you excited to wake up in the morning. And I think that's what's so cool about digital minimalism. It's not just about less screen time. It's a whole way of living, of being more mindful and using tech as a tool to help you live the life you want.
It's about being human in a world that's increasingly dominated by tech, finding meaning and connection beyond the screen.
And these sources show us how to do it. They give us practical tips, inspiring stories, and new ways of thinking that can help us navigate this digital world and build a life that's truly meaningful.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed by technology, if you're looking for more meaning and connection in your life, check out the ideas of digital minimalism.
It could change your life.
We'll be back in a bit to wrap things up and share some final thoughts. Hopefully you'll leave feeling inspired and ready to take charge of your digital life. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. As we wrap up our exploration of digital minimalism, there's one thing that keeps coming back to me, this idea of reclaiming our own agency. Like, we've talked about decluttering, setting boundaries, being intentional, but at its core, it's about remembering that we're not just along for the ride in this digital world, we can actually shape it.
You're so right. The sources we've been looking at really make it clear that we have way more control than we realize. We're so used to the constant speed of technology, the notifications, the FOMO, that it's easy to forget we can actually step back, disconnect, and take back our time and attention.
It's like we've been on autopilot, just reacting to every ping and buzz instead of making conscious choices about how we want to use tech.
Exactly. And that's where the power of digital minimalism comes in. It's not just about cutting down on screen time, it's about changing our mindset from passive consumers to active creators.
So instead of letting our devices run the show, we take charge, set our own priorities, and use tech in a way that actually aligns with what we care about.
Exactly. And the sources give us this roadmap for how to do that. They offer practical strategies, inspiring stories, and new ways of thinking to help us navigate this digital world and build a life that feels authentically ours.
One of the things that really stuck with me was the idea of high-quality leisure. Like, recognizing that real leisure isn't about just vegging out in front of a screen. It's about doing things that challenge us, make us happy, and help us grow.
You got it. And these activities don't have to be complicated or expensive. It could be as simple as walking in nature, reading a book, taking a cooking class, learning an instrument, volunteering, or even just quality time with loved ones. No phones, no distractions.
It's about making time for the things that make you feel truly alive, connected to yourself and the world around you.
Right. And plan it in like you would a meeting. Make it a priority, not just something you squeeze in if there's time.
Because it's not just about productivity, it's about living a life that feels balanced and fulfilling, a life that reflects your values and priorities.
Exactly. And I think that's what digital minimalism is all about. It's not a set of rules, it's a philosophy that empowers you to decide how tech fits into your life and to create a digital experience that makes you feel good and helps you live a more meaningful life.
It's about taking back your control, your time, your attention, and using those things to create a life you truly love.
Beautifully said. I think that's the perfect way to sum it up.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot in this deep dive into digital minimalism, but hopefully you've got some food for thought, some new ideas to try, and a feeling that you can actually take charge of your digital life.
Remember, you have more control than you think. Use tech to serve you. Don't let it control you.
And, as always, we'd love to hear what resonated with you, what insights did you get, what are you going to try, what questions do you still have?
Share your thoughts in the comments or on social media, but maybe set a timer just in case.
Good point. It's all about intentionality, right?
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Until next time, stay curious.